sometimes you have to be able to say no to the good things so that you can say yes to the best things. Don't have margin in your life. You're just constantly saying yes to some good things. We can work 16-hour days because we're saying yes to so many good things, but you're setting yourself up to not be able to say yes to some great things.
Right.
And so learning that discipline of being able to say, no, this is really good. And this is an awesome thing, but I'm going to have to say no so that I can say yes to some really amazing things later on. That's creating margin in your life.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Known Disciple Project podcast. Today, we're going to continue our discussion that started with drift a couple of episodes ago. Then last time we talked about grit. And today we're talking about margin in a series that we think is critical for Christian disciples, men who are building themselves into leaders, following Christ, and bringing as many people along on this journey as they can. And so with that, dive in with me and Justin as we explore our experiences around creating margin in our life, maybe even push back a little bit against it and all the failures we've had with this in our life. And so let's dive in. Justin, how are you feeling, man?
I feel good. I'm excited about this one. It's something that I've struggled with for a lot in the past and have learned a lot about more recently. So excited about it. It's super important and ready to rock and roll.
Let's do it. Let's rock and roll. I think we've got to start with probably telling people what we mean when we say margin, because it's not a word people talk about all the time.
No, it's not. And it took me a while to figure that because in my head, margin was something that you use for trading. It's like money that you can borrow. And so
I thought it was something you put on your toast, or is that margarine?
It depends on where you live in the country. And so I think margarine, I don't know, Northeast maybe, margin.
Maybe.
Yeah, down here in the South, it's margin. I think the definition, Mark, is margin is the space between your load and your limits. So what you can carry or what you're carrying and what you can carry. That's probably the best way I've had it explained to me is the space between your load and your limits. And an analogy that I've heard concerning margin over and over is we've all seen a truck that's driving down the road and it's just overfilled. And what happens to it? Like the suspension starts to break and, it's riding like this. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of men probably are living their lives kind of like that truck. They're overloaded and the limits are about to break. And so that's the best way I can describe it and the best analogy that I've heard of it. So what about you?
That's so good, man. I don't think I would add anything to it. The space between your capacity or the load you could carry versus what you actually are. And yeah. I would just maybe say that there are degrees to this. And so like there is a level of capacity I can get to with what I can carry. And I actually could go beyond it briefly as well.
Yeah, sure.
And then there's, of course, all the things below the capacity that I could carry. And we could have too few things. And so that margin, that space that needs to be there, dude, for one, as hard charging men, we're not necessarily wired to create margin. It's something we got to actively do for sure. But I think guys can go too far the other way too and not be putting in enough work on themselves or on their work or on their families. And they're not fully developing into the man they could.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this. Andy Stanley said this about margin. He said it's the amount available beyond what is necessary.
Okay, nice.
That paints such a good picture for me. Just concerning margin, and I'll say it again. Margin is the amount available beyond what is necessary. And so, yeah, I think it can swing both ways. We can be overburdened or we can be way underburdened. And like we've said numerous times now, it's all about balance. But this is an interesting topic because I don't think very many people have ever heard the word margin, especially as it applies to your personal life or your spiritual life. So we have a pretty good example in Jesus, that guy. You know,
Guy.
yeah, that guy. Ironically, he's a pretty good example of a lot of things, but he was a pretty good example of margin as well. And so we'll dive into that.
You said something as we were prepping for this episode about Genesis. Let's start there, man.
Yeah. So I, I relate margin to Sabbath and rest, um, which Sabbath for me was a really hard pill to swallow for a long time. The pastor of our church is in our small group, and I actually told him that I was going to tell the story. Um, so we're all good with telling it. And so one of the first few times
Permission granted.
yeah, permission granted. This will, I look forward to hearing his response to this clip. But one of the first few times that him and his wife visited our small group, they started talking about Sabbath, and they are super, super disciplined about their life around Sabbath. They plan for it. They participate in it. They take 24 hours a week to do absolutely nothing. And I remember that night that they were explaining it as we were building our relationship, and our relationship was new. I went to bed that night and I was talking to my wife, and I was like, man, I think the new pastor is extremely lazy. And she kind of was like, what? And I was like, he literally sits around for 24 hours and doesn't do anything at all. That would drive me crazy. And what I've realized through that and getting to know him and studying the discipline of Sabbath is it is one of the most disciplined form of spiritual discipline that there is.
Yeah.
And I think, before we jumped on, you had an outstanding way of explaining that. And so, but getting to know our pastor, and understanding Sabbath, it takes a ton of discipline to Sabbath and to create margin in your life. And it's also a commandment. It is the fourth commandment. It's to honor the Sabbath. And we can get into the logistics of all that, whatever. But um, it takes a ton of discipline to Sabbath and to create margin in your life. And so explain, like, tell the audience what you told me earlier about how you viewed that.
Well, it was a thought that you triggered sharing that story with me as we were kind of just warming up a little bit today. And it hit me that in my own life, it has taken a lot more discipline and a lot more purposeful intent to honor the Sabbath and the rest rhythms in my life than it has to just work hard all the time. Like, I don't need to put in a ton of effort to become somebody who works 12 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week. I default to that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of guys will probably relate to that. Maybe not everybody, but I think a lot of guys who are self-identified, hard-charging, driven men are like, I don't have a problem working 12 hours. I can do this forever. Spoiler alert, you break down. That's what I
Yeah.
found for sure. And so when you said that, it just stuck out to me that, oh my gosh, it's actually really lazy of me to continue working at a pace that is beyond my capacity because I'm not putting in the purposeful intent of protecting my boundaries. And so,
100%.
like, it's not lazy to protect your boundaries in Sabbath or to have rhythms of rest. It's actually lazier to not purposefully work on it and burn yourself into the ground.
Yes. It is. I mean, it was a commandment for a reason. And it took me a long time to realize that it's not just rest. Like, it took me a long time to realize why rest is so important. And I still struggle with this, Mark. Like, I really do. And it's something that has been convicting the last few years for me, because I'm just not wired that way. I'm not. I enjoy waking up and just going. And if I have idle time, and that was kind of my pushback with when Sabbath was introduced to me. Idle time. What is it? Idle time or idle hands is the devil's playground.
Yeah.
You know, if I found myself in that situation a lot, if I tried to take a step back and relax, that my mind would wander. And so it is a discipline that you have to form and shape. And it's so important because just like you, and I think we're wired a lot of alike, at some point, during our day or our week or our life, we're just going to run out of energy. And that doesn't benefit anybody at all. And so the opportunity and the ability to create margin in your life, it's super important. That's super important. And it's hard to do because we are distracted and as men, we are pulled in a million different directions daily. And figuring out where your priorities are and, creating margin in that space, it's invaluable. I mean, it really is. And so I have a question. I have a question for you, and I have a question for anybody that is watching this, and it relates to margin. What is the priority in your life? Simple. Like really think on that and chew on it. What is the priority in your life? And margin is, has you have the opportunity to answer that question by creating margin in your life. And that question haunts me a lot, because I think we have the opportunity to create margin. Mm-hmm. We just fill it with a bunch of crap that entertains us for a few minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. I can tell you for me, where I really struggle with this is I'm currently running 3 businesses, and it is incredibly easy for me to do that because I absolutely love it. Right? It doesn't take work for me to want to do that and put in 16-hour days. And I don't think I don't think margin means that you don't put in 16-hour days as an example. What I do think it means is that you are not wrecking everything else around you by doing it.
Right.
So for example, there are times when I've just got to put in long days, get a project across the table or across the finish line, different things like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if I'm constantly, this has been my actual experience, and not just for me, but in the coaching work that I do with people as well. If I'm constantly so busy that I'm at max capacity all the time, there is no margin, meaning there's no rest or reset or even adventure and fun in my life, then the most dangerous thing can happen. One, I start to isolate myself because I have to start to protect my reserves, protect my energy, right? I'm going to perform and work. And so I need to cut off everything that takes away from my ability to do that. And this is all subconscious. It's not like I'm actually actively thinking this. Right. And so what typically gets cut out is exercise, because it's pretty easy to give up an hour in the gym so that I can have another hour on a project, or relationships. Talking to my kids, hanging out with my wife, spending time with my friends and my brothers outside of work. Those are the things that don't quote unquote produce something right away. And they're less measurable as far as the result. And so they get cut out for something that is easier to measure and might produce something faster like work. But what a dangerous road, man. For me, that is where I fall apart and where I have to constantly be reminded, if I'm not purposefully building margin into my day and into my week, into my life in general, then I'm in danger of violating the exact reason I was called to do any of it at all, which is to love God and love people.
Yeah, I agree completely. And you know what, Mark, sometimes you have to be able to say no to the good things so that you can say yes to the best things. And if you don't have, if you don't have margin in your life, you're just constantly saying yes to some good things, right? I don't think that, and that's not bad. We can work 16-hour days because we're saying yes to so many good things, but you're setting yourself up to not be able to say yes to some great things. And so learning that discipline of being able to say, no, this is really good. And this is an awesome thing, but I'm gonna have to say no so that I can say yes to some really amazing things later on. That's creating margin in your life. And that's a positive, right? It's not all negative. Creating margin in your life is not all negative, but sometimes you do have to say no to some really good things so that you can say yes to some of the best things.
That's gold, man. Yeah, for anybody listening, Craig Groeschel has a really good way of framing that, what you just said, Justin, which is think about what you want most versus what you want right now. And once I heard him say that, I also read it in his book, The Power to Change. Great book for anybody looking for something on habits and a Christian perspective on goals and whatnot. But thinking about that, this is how I do it for myself. I could put in a few more hours. I could actually go and, burn myself out because what I want right now is results. But what I want most is typically something different. It's health, it's relationships, it's a great relationship with Christ and with God. And so those two things have to align. And I
Yeah,
think that's where margin begins to shape.
yeah, I agree. I think another way that it kind of just resonates with me is I really got stuck on margin and Sabbath as relating it to laziness. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing less. It's about making room for what matters the most. And so I would challenge the guys and myself. I have to challenge myself all the time with this is to look at your calendar and figure out what is taking up your time. And do those things that are taking up your time matter the most? And if there's ways to wiggle around by doing less so that you can prioritize the things that matter the most in your life, that's creating margin in your life. And again, I don't want to have to go back to it all the time, but it's having to be able to say no everyone once in a while to some really good things so that when something better presents itself, you have the opportunity to say yes.
That's an interesting concept and one that I definitely lean into a lot. But how do you help somebody learn to say no to things that are taking away from everything they want to be doing?
Man, that is such a struggle. It really is. Especially for me, because I feel like I have a servant's heart. I enjoy serving. I'm a pleaser by nature. And I have a really hard time saying no. And I think that one of the things that I learned going back to, the lesson on Sabbath and learning from our pastor is that 24-hour window, or if it's 12 hours or 8 hours or however long you can afford to Sabbath, that benefits you in so many ways because you're able to just pause and think for a little bit and kind of reorganize where your priorities are. And, for I say yes to, I mean, I did. I've gotten better at it through the years, but I would say yes to everything. Mark, you call me and you say, "Hey, I need your help with this." Yes, I'll be there. Uh, You know, and it's not, depending on the circumstance, of course, but I would say yes to so many different things that by the end of the day, I just didn't have anything left for the priorities in my life, my wife, my family, my quiet time, my fitness, my ministry. I was just burnt out.
Hmm.
And so studying and realizing the importance of Sabbath and why God created it has been extremely eye opening for me. Um, the last couple of years, I still have a lot of resistance to it. Like I still, my wife and I try um, to go 24 hours on a Saturday or a Sunday and just do absolutely nothing, and I struggle with it uh, badly. But we've increased the increments slowly. Some weekends it's just 2 or 3 hours that we just say, "Hey, let's just disconnect from everything and just rewire ourselves and prepare for the next week." And that's another benefit too, especially for guys that are hard chargers that are running businesses that are juggling so many things that we have to juggle. That 24 hours gives you an opportunity to rest and recharge, and you can actually recover so well in that time period that the rest of your week, I mean, you're energized, you're ready to go. And so it's a lesson. Like it's something that you have to work at. It's a discipline. I mean, it really is a
It's
discipline.
a spiritual discipline, is what it is.
It is.
100%.
100%. Yep. 100%.
Yeah, I think the word for me is rhythms. There's a rhythm to creation. There's a rhythm to rest. There's a rhythm to work. And what I've observed in myself and others is that we try to show up in our life like we can be peaked all the time. Like we're showing up maximum energy, maximum workload all the time. And then we get disappointed in ourselves when we can't do that.
Yeah.
because we're not designed for it. We're quite literally designed to work hard and also rest, but not just to rest for the sake of rest, to make sure that we are pointing our rest toward God. And I'm not saying, for anybody who's confused by that, I'm not saying that every time you relax and rest, like you're spending time in prayer, reading your Bible, and that's it. That's not what I mean. I mean creating enough rest in your life so that you're not so overly burdened and burned out that you can't pray or read your Bible or spend time on the other spiritual disciplines, which I think is where a lot of men are stuck. They can't figure out why life feels so chaotic. They can't figure out why they're struggling with their faith, their relationships, their health. And at the end of the day, it's because they have no mental bandwidth to focus on these things.
Yeah, I agree. And who gets the leftovers?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that in my life, God gets the leftovers, my wife gets the leftovers, and my kids get the leftovers. And I'm out serving and doing and going for so many other people and so many other, opportunities or prospects or just things. And then the priorities in my life get the leftovers. And it should be completely opposite of that. And we've completely flipped that around. Rest first and then be energized so that Mark Hummel needs something, I'm there for him. I have the time and I have the capacity and the energy to do it with not expending all that energy and coming home and saying, hey, let's have, dinner together, or let's, I wasn't in the word this morning. I have the energy now to get in the word. Hey, you want to go on a date tonight? Yada, yada.
He's not talking to me, you guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just in case you missed that
Not,
bridge.
yeah.
He's going to hang out with Mark Hummel, but then go on the date with his wife.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, let's separate that, please. Rebecca's looking at me right now like, you're taking Mark out on a date? It's been 3 months since you've taken me out. No, it hasn't. So, yeah, I mean, it truly is one of the things that has completely wrecked me over the last few years, because I feel like I have to do so many things to set myself up for future success, especially as a business owner. Like, I have to do all these things or it's not going to get done. And it's just a complete lack of faith in God. Like, God tells me to Sabbath.
Yeah.
If God's telling me to Sabbath and I'm, pushing back on that in expectations of being able to build something, there's probably a reason he's telling me to Sabbath and to create margin in my life.
It's such a form of control to
Yes.
say, I cannot rest, even though I know in scripture, if I'm following Jesus, he is my teacher, I'm a disciple. I'm not going to do that piece of clearly, I'm not going to do that thing he displayed for us to do. It's such a form of control to say, I'll take everything on myself as if I control the outcomes. And dude, I'll tell you what, if you want to practice submission to God and letting go of the outcomes in your life, which we're all called to do, by the way, we control effort, we don't control outcomes. And so as we are doing that, if you want to really practice, like submit your schedule, submit your time, submit yourself to rest. And you're really going to be challenged to start developing some discipline. Because again, I don't think it takes a whole lot of discipline to feel like you're forced to work all the time.
No, not at all.
It takes discipline to build those boundaries in and rest.
I think one of the most overlooked realities in scripture is that Jesus took time for himself. Like Mark, in Mark, he talks about, well, not just Mark, but throughout scripture, you hear about Jesus taking time to go away in solitude, right? He's creating margin. That's a pretty good example of what we should do, right? And I mean, it's so overlooked in scripture. I think just because we're wired in our society to always be going after something. And so creating that margin in your life, there's so many benefits to it. And I'm preaching to myself right now.
I am too.
I mean, I am. I've tried this in my business as well. Do you time block your day?
Religiously, yeah.
Okay. That's something I'm new to, and I feel completely guilty. I like to time block 30 to 60 minutes of professional development throughout the day. And when I do that, especially when I'm in office and my staff is looking at me like, he's just reading a book right now. I feel super guilty about that, but it's super important to do that, right? Because it's growing. I'm growing as as a business owner, but we don't have enough margin in our personal lives to create time for God or create time for our families and our children. And it's just invaluable, Mark. I mean, it really is. And it's a discipline. It is definitely a discipline. But Jesus was a great example of that. He continuously stepped away, um, continuously. So if Jesus needed margin, I would think that we probably do too.
Yeah, I would think that we probably need a lot more of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Well, with that though, so we've gotten to a point where we're saying in the conversation, there's a rhythm to rest, that it takes more discipline to rest. You have to become a more disciplined man, self-controlled man, the only form of control we're called to, by the way, and in order to be restful. But that is on a micro level and a macro level, I think.
Okay.
And so here comes our micro dosy language for the episode again. But I think that there is something to be said for practicing the Sabbath weekly. And just to throw this out too, like if you've never done that before, you don't have to suddenly go into now I'm carving out a whole day. You can start small, right? You can
Yeah.
start with a couple hours, half a day, whatever that looks like for you. I would just encourage you to consider starting something. But there's also a daily rhythm to this. And even bigger than weekly, there's a big rhythm for this as well. What I've noticed for me is about every 6 weeks, I start getting a little antsy. Like I've got to
Mhm.
change my environment, maybe pattern interrupt, stop working for a few days and hit the reset button. And not everybody has the luxury probably of saying every 6 weeks, I'm just going to take a Friday off. You may or may not have
Right.
that ability. But just in general, the concept is I've noticed that at about 6 weeks, I really do need a reset.
Yeah.
And especially if I'm not weekly hitting the reset button, it's even more frequent. And then going back one more step, I've also noticed that in the daytime, like just a single day, if I don't end my day with some gas in the tank, that's a recipe for burnout. If I just go and go and go until I have to, in an exhausted way, just fall across the finish line for the day, then I'm going to get up the next day already exhausted.
Yeah.
And that's a recipe for disaster. I think a lot of men are living that way. A lot of guys I coach right now are living that way, and we're kind of unwinding that together. But that principle of ending your day with gas in the tank is critical, I think.
It is. Uh, it's just hard to do, especially if you're just starting out. I'm glad you mentioned that you don't have to jump into this into margin and into Sabbath. Both feet at the same time. You've got to kind of dip your toes in the water a little bit.
Hmm.
But even if you're just dipping your toes in the water, that's giving you a little bit more fuel that'll last you throughout the day. And so you're not coming home completely empty because you took 5 minutes or 10 minutes or however long it takes you to build up. I mean, 24 hours for us is the goal, and we're not near there at all. But just microdosing it right into your daily life is, gives you that stamina that you're talking about for at the end of the day, that you're not just dragging yourself across the finish line.
I think we got to talk about the other side of this, Justin.
All right.
So we're talking to all those people right now who are hard charging, working a lot guys. What about the other side of it where they've taken margin a little too far?
Stop being lazy. I mean,
Stop
there's
being
no.
like Justin Pastor.
Yeah, right. Oh, you're gonna love that.
He's my pastor too. So if he's listening to this, I'm sorry. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, I mean, stop making excuses. We know whenever we're taking advantage of the time, Mark. There's some things that I'll sugarcoat in life, and some things that I'll just be completely straightforward with. And if you know that you're taking advantage of the margin in your life, just stop being lazy. I mean, there's no other way to say that. That may seem harsh, but you're feeling it and you're living it, and I've lived that as well.
Hmm.
There are times that I've taken advantage of of laziness. There's priorities that need, and it goes back to your priorities. if your priorities are still slapping you in the face and you're laying on the couch eating Cheetos, then you probably need to work on that. And so that's pretty harsh, but yeah, I'm
I
not going
don't
to hold back on that.
I don't think it's harsh at all. I think it's what we're called to do as brothers in Christ
Yeah,
is to tell each other when we're not showing up the way that we could. And that's part of the reason for this podcast at all, is for us to challenge men to show up as the leaders we know that God called us to be. There's too much there is too much passivity in our society right now. And I think a lot of men have gone too far into passivity. They're
yeah,
not seeking challenge, but at the same time, they feel called to challenge. And that's what I would call an identity gap, right? And so there's an awful lot of guys out there. We run into them in our church, we run into them in business and just kind of all over the place that almost refuse to work hard. And I think there's something to be said for that. It's a topic we need to dive into because, especially with younger generations, what we're seeing right now is they just have no connection to a mission in their life. Because they have no mission in their life, they have no meaning in their life. If there's no meaning, why would you ever work hard? There's no reason to,
yeah.
right?
We are called to a purpose. It is it is deep in our bones to feel purpose and to find purpose. When we don't have a purpose in life. So, I'm heavily involved with veterans and first responders with addiction and suicide. And that is one of the common ties to the suicide epidemic that we have in the United States is the lack of purpose. People leave the service, they leave the fire department, police department, EMS, and for the majority of their life or their career, they put that uniform on and they have purpose. And then as soon as they take it off, and it is going to come off at some point, they've lost that purpose and they just sit around and search for that, and try to find that. And it creates so many issues and isolation and depression and anxiety. And I could go on and on again with it. But, having that purpose in your life, you can't find purpose if you're sitting on the couch being lazy. You can't. And so I'm passionate about that. And, I've lived that. I've lived that where I just didn't want to get up off the couch or get up and get out of bed. Um, I felt like there was a purpose. I was just too lazy to do it. And so, if I come across too strong with that one, it's because I've walked in those steps a lot in my life.
Yeah, I think like I would summarize our conversation so far like this, and there's two camps of men. One are these guys who are the grit grind willpower hustle guys, like just put in the long days, keep your head down, and just keep going, and you burn through your margin. And for a lot of us, what that looks like is you burn through your relationships and your faith as well, and your health probably as well. And then on the other side of it, there are guys who have they've taken this passive stance toward hard work, not because they're terrible guys. If you're
No,
listening to this and you're starting to feel a little bit of conviction around, maybe I could put in a little more effort in my marriage. Maybe I could put a little more effort into my health or into my spiritual development. Maybe I should show up to church rather than just watch it online, or maybe whatever it is you're feeling, right? It's not about doing things. It's not about just do more. It's about having a mission in your life and a goal to become the man that you can be. And that has to be aimed at God. So, and so with that as the backing, what we typically say, especially at the Known Disciple Project, is we're building communities and coaching people and doing the podcast. Is what we want to see is that men are starting with identity, like who am I because of who God says I am? And then we're going to your life, like what kind of life am I building because of who I am? And then we go to the goals, habits, behaviors, what we call life alignment, with the things that you do in your life. And so we don't want to be passive men and shy away from putting in the hard work, but we also don't want to burn up all of our margin so much so that we're burning down the world around us.
yeah, absolutely. And that's very well said. And you know, it's still a balance of things. I mean, it really is. There's times that we just absolutely need to rest, and there's times that we need to get up and just go and be hard charging. Um, and recognizing when those times are, that's going to save you from a lot of exhaustion and burnout and, um, struggles with your marriage, isolation, struggles with yourself, depression, anxiety, struggles in your home life, struggles in your spiritual life. Being able to sit back and recognize where you're at, because there are times where you just got to take you got to get up and go. I mean, you just have to. But being able to say, okay, I've had the hard charge for the last week. Now it's time to reset and recognize that it's just a level of maturity that many of us just haven't tried to approach yet. We have it in us, but we are designed and created for a purpose, no matter who you are. Like God designed us specifically for a purpose. Finding that purpose is something that we need to do. It doesn't have to be building a multi-billion-dollar business. It could be something as simple as, helping an old lady across the street. But finding that is super important. I do have some signs of a hurried life that I jotted down. If you want me to share them with you,
Yeah, please.
just to be able to recognize if your life is too hurried. If you have struggle, if you struggle just relaxing, which that's where I'm at or have been at, still at. Um, if you can't just sit down and relax, you probably have a hurried life. If you're extremely uncomfortable with silence,
Mm.
you probably have a hurried life. If you're rarely satisfied, you probably have a hurried life. If you're living by shifting standards, then that's a sign of a hurried life as well. And I'll drop you one more. We aren't happy unless we feel successful. That's probably a sign of hurried life.
Yeah.
I think that kind of relates to us being hard chargers and working 18-hour days to feel successful.
Yeah.
And that definition of success can be extremely dangerous.
Man, for me, that is the thing I repeat to myself every once in a while when things are rough, and I say, I just need some wins. I just need
Yeah.
some
Oh,
wins. And
yes.
I
Yes.
heard my mind didn't shift around this until I heard somebody else say it once in a coaching appointment. I was the coach. I'm leading this guy, and he taught me, which happens all
That's
the time,
awesome.
by the way.
Yeah.
And he said, "I just need some wins," and it hit me. I've said that to myself, but this person in front of me, he's not saying that he needs wins. What he's saying is he needs to feel like a winner, right? And the same thing is true for me. When I'm thinking that, I don't actually need everything to go right. I just need to feel like I have some level of control in my life. I need to feel like I'm a winner, even if
Yeah.
things aren't actually winning. And so it's a little bit of a mindset shift too. Every day you're showing up, putting in those reps from an identity perspective, becoming the man you know you can be because of who God said you are. Like you're winning, you're running the race. That's a mission. I think that leads to everything else.
Agree. That's awesome. I've said that so many times, especially in the last 5 years as a business owner. I just need some wins, man. No, I just need to feel good about myself for a few minutes.
Just for a few minutes. That sounds
Yeah.
nice.
Right.
Dude, let's make this practical for the guys listening, guys and girls, of course. This is for everybody, but we primarily point our conversations at Christian men. So, what are some things guys could do, practically speaking, right now to just become more aware of where they should have margin in their life?
Yeah, I think one of the first thing you can do is plan some margin in your life, like plan it in your calendar. And it doesn't have to be 24 hours. It doesn't have to be an hour. Um, for me, even taking 5 minutes to sit in silence was extremely uncomfortable. So just plan some margin in your calendar. Of course, you can ask God for wisdom in making choices because again, you're going to have to say no to some good things, but that gives you the opportunity to say yes to some best things. Ask yourself what you value the most. Ask yourself what your priorities are. Ask yourself if there's struggles in your marriage and if those are related to, time being taken away in other aspects of your life, because that's, in my opinion, probably the biggest, mission field that I have right now is my marriage. And ask yourself what your financial responsibilities are. Check your emotional health. Um, but really just start small and schedule margin in your life so that you can keep all those other things in balance. What do you think?
So like a self audit, kind of
Yeah, absolutely.
pause and audit what your schedule looks like, where your priorities are.
Yeah, this is a little dark, Mark, and I haven't done it in a few years, but I learned this in 2001 on my deployment after September 11th. You sit down, you're deploying, and you sit down and you have to write essentially a letter to your family saying, "Hey, if I don't make it back," right? And I carried that. I used to do it about every 5 years, 3 to 5 years. I haven't done it in a long time, but every 3 to 5 years, I'd sit down, and this seems extremely dark, but it's a really cool little exercise, and just write a letter to your family that if for some reason, um, I don't make it back, that'll give you a really good idea of where your priorities are, and to be able to look at that and say, "Hey, if I don't make it back, I just want you to know that I love you and that I enjoyed this aspect of our life. And I always want to be remembered for this." I promise you that you're not going to write that letter. Man, I really wish I would have worked harder, you know? And so that is an extremely valuable exercise to kind of refocus where your priorities are. Um, so I'll challenge the guys to do that, sit down and write that letter out. But just start small, like we've said. I mean, microdose it and, just plan it, plan some margin in your calendar. Start there. 1 minute a day, 3 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day, an hour a day, and just build it up. So how about you? What's some practical ways for everybody to kind of add some margin?
Well, first, I would definitely echo what you just said, and I'd recommend any man to take on that exercise and give it a try, and you'll be amazed at what comes out. Stuff that's probably buried pretty deep sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk to the liars for a minute.
Okay.
I'm going to talk to the guys who are lying to themselves, saying I can juggle it all, I can hold it all, and someday I'll have margin. The people who need you to show up the most for them in your life are not getting what they need from you. If
Mm,
you're at capacity, burned out, and giving them the leftovers, as Justin put it earlier. And it's a lie to think that you can always be completely depleted and showing up for other people. And so stop lying to yourself if that's where
yeah.
you are in your life, and get really, really focused on the discipline of creating margin. Practically speaking, to Justin's point, that might look like just a few minutes here and there, or maybe 15 minutes for me. One thing that has been really helpful is to set a timer for 15 minutes in the morning to just be quiet. And it's a way for me to practice a pattern interrupt. And that has turned into longer periods of time, deeper thought. It goes places when you practice it, but it starts by purposefully putting something on your calendar and protecting it.
I think all of us can identify one thing that we can eliminate from our calendar.
100%.
Yeah. Just one thing.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I challenge everybody to do that. Just identify one thing in your life that you can eliminate from your calendar.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good one, man. I got one more thing for the liars. And that is that we tend to lie to ourselves and say, I'm better for everybody if I'm doing all of this stuff. But the truth is you will show up in a more powerful way for yourself, for your family, for your business, for your faith, if you have margin. Because one
Amen.
of the biggest tools of the devil is to keep you so busy and so distracted that you don't think.
Yep.
You don't think about your development. You don't think about your family. You don't think about where you're headed. And we have to be able to think. I think that's why Jesus spent time with solitude, is not only to go pray and connect with God, but as a man, you've got to contemplate what's happening around you. You've got to think about it, hold it in your hand, mold it. And then if you're not isolated, solitude is different than isolation, right? If you're not isolated, you can take it to your brothers too and say, here's how I'm showing up. Here's what I'm thinking. And then it gets even more powerful. But if you don't have margin in your life to slow down and put in that thought work, which is what the devil's always trying to get us to do, no time to think.
Yep.
You're just going to miss out on a lot.
Yeah, my wife always reminds me that if the devil can't make you sin, he'll make you busy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Awesome.
one of my favorite things or sayings that she constantly reminds me of that when she knows when I'm, burning the candles at both ends. Justin, if the devil can't make you sin, he's going to make you busy.
So
So,
true, man.
yeah.
All right, dude. I think we're
Yeah.
wrapped for this one. So
Yeah.
what's
See.
your final thought for this episode?
Yeah, I would challenge everybody to look into the importance of Sabbath, of course, which is related to margin. Um, and don't beat yourself up over it. Like if you can't, eh, don't beat yourself up over feeling lazy. If you're taking a few minutes to just take a step back and relax, like it's scriptural. It is a commandment, and Jesus did a really good example. Or set a really good example of showing us how to live with margin in our lives, and he kind of accomplished a lot. And so if he can accomplish what he accomplished in life by taking some time for solitude and margin, then I'm sure that we can benefit from that as well.
100% with you, brother. All right. So if you are listening to this, we would be honored if you would share this episode with your friends, your small groups, or anybody that is on a discipleship journey. And maybe they need to create a little bit of margin in their life, or perhaps they need to actually have a little less margin if they've been sitting back, folding their hands on some things.
Uh,
So with that, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you on the next one.
All right.